Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
If you were around in the 80s and 90s, you heard a lot of music by Hall and Oates. I'll admit I was not a huge fan at the time. It was kind of soft rock for the most part. But I do like some of their songs now as I've mellowed with age. Wait For Me is a great song. But several people sent me a story, in fact quite a few did, including Neil, about Hall and Oates. Apparently, they are not amicable at this moment in time. And in fact, Daryl Hall accuses John Oates of ultimate partnership betrayal and planned to sell a stake in the business. And so the story first broke when Hall apparently filed a restraining order against Oates. And people are saying, wait, Hall and Oates aren't getting along? These guys write music about getting along. So in a court filing, Hall accuses Oates of moving to sell his share of the team's joint venture. The court hearing is scheduled for Thursday. Jonathan Matisse wrote this for the Associated Press. Daryl Hall has accused his longtime music partner, John Oates, of committing the ultimate partnership betrayal, planning to sell his share of the Hall and Oates duo's joint venture without the other's permission, Hall said in something he filed in the court supporting his lawsuit, and he's trying to get the transaction paused. In the declaration filed Wednesday in Nashville, Hall also lamented the deterioration of his relationship with and the trust in his musical partner of more than half a century. The joint venture in question includes Hall & Oates trademarks, personal name and likeness rights, record royalty income, website, and social media assets. Now, in his own court filing later Wednesday, Oates said that he was disappointed in Hall's inflammatory, outlandish, and inaccurate statements about me, and argued that he had been trying for some time to enhance their business relationship. A judge has issued a TRO blocking the sale of Oates' share of Whole Oats Enterprise. And apparently there's an investment management company that wanted to buy that. But that's while legal proceedings and a previously initiated arbitration continue. A court hearing is scheduled in the case. Hall is seeking further court action to keep the transaction on hold, while falsely contending over the last several months that the Oates Trust wanted to maintain ownership. John Oates and the co-trustees engaged in the ultimate partnership betrayal, Hall said in a declaration. They surreptitiously sought to sell half of the assets without obtaining any written approval. Oates argued in his filings that the court should not extend the temporary restraining order, and he said he didn't want to publicly address details of the dealings that he considers private matters. But in response to the suggestion that he was the one causing the rift, he argued that Hall has been trying for years to be seen as an individual. Well, technically speaking, he is. Over the years, Daryl has consistently and publicly been adamant about being perceived as an individual rather than as a part of a duo or group. Thus, he has insisted on our being known as Daryl Hall and John Oates rather than the more commonly known Hall and Oates. Oates wrote in his declaration, "On this point, I agree. I now must act with truthfulness and make decisions that are right for myself, my family, and my artistic future." And Daryl Hall actually has a really cool series. Poke around, you'll find it. I think it's also on YouTube, where he has a recording studio and music space in his home. And he has all kinds of instruments set up in there. And he brings in other musicians and basically jams with them. And then they'll put out, I think it's a half-hour, hour-long episode, where half the songs will be by the person that he's brought in, and the other half will be them covering Hall and Oates songs. And it's fascinating, especially if you like music. So a Nashville court judge issued the temporary restraining order the same day Hall filed his lawsuit, writing that Oates and others involved in his trust can't move to close the sale until an arbitrator in a separately filed case weighs in on the deal, or until the judge's order expires, typically within 15 days, unless the judge extends the deadline. Hall's declaration was initially filed in the arbitration case. So here's the thing, is that if they have an operating agreement for their partnership, which I suspect they do at this point, someplace in there is going to be language that covers several things, one of which is what happens if one of them wants out, and what happens if you seek to dissolve the partnership. Because generally speaking, if you and I have a partnership, either one of us can decide to walk away from it, unless there's an agreement that says how the partnership will be dissolved. Likewise, it appears that the agreement has an arbitration clause that says if we get into a dispute, we shall arbitrate. Same. So the fact that there's an arbitration filed and pending, and then a lawsuit gets filed, makes it appear that someone thought that the other party might be proceeding without waiting for the arbitration to happen. And that could be a problem. But again, these are all allegations, and they're literally he said, with different he's. So the lawsuit contends that Hall opened an arbitration process in November against Oates and the other defendants in the lawsuit, including Oates' wife and another person, for their roles as co-trustees of the trust for Oates. Hall was seeking an order preventing them from selling their part in Whole Oates Enterprises to the investment group I told you about. Meanwhile, that investment group has already owned significant interest in the Hall & Oates catalog for more than 15 years. And that's something that people are becoming more and more aware of these days, is that there was a time when songwriters and rock stars and musicians got paid for their work, but they had to scrap for every last penny. I recently read the autobiography of P.F. Sloan, who wrote the song Eve of Destruction, and he tells stories about what happened to his royalties and basically how they didn't come to him. And so the musicians who were lucky enough to have good management and hang on to their catalogs over the years have discovered how lucrative they can be. So, for instance, there are bands out there that had one hit or two hits, but that one or other hit will get used in commercials. And if you have a song in a nationwide commercial campaign in America, 30 years after you had your one hit, you're probably making multiples of money on the ad than you ever made on that song back in the day. And so these catalogs become extremely valuable, extremely valuable. So we've heard about, for instance, the Beatles catalog, whole stories there. David Bowie, before he passed away, he, a couple years earlier, put his catalog into a business setup where people could buy into it, investment groups could buy into it, and for money in the present, they would get the royalties paid off in the future. And so there's all kinds of things you can do here. Hall & Oates' catalog is quite large. A lot of songs a lot of people have heard, a lot of songs that a lot of people like. That catalog has a lot of value. The lawsuit says Oates' team entered into a letter of intent with the investment firm and alleges further that the letter makes clear the music duo's business agreement was disclosed to the investment group in violation of a confidentiality provision. That's another problem. Additionally, Hall said in his declaration he would not approve of such a sale and does not agree with the business model of the investment company. And a lot of people ask me about non-disclosure agreements. They go, are those legal? Yes, they are. And so two people sit down, there's an agreement between them, and it says, we're going to sign this, and we promise never to disclose this to any third party unless required to do so by law. So if a judge says, let me see it, you got to let the judge see it. But, and that's during litigation, of course. So non-disclosure agreements are enforceable, and that would also be a problem, the allegation is. Hall said he was blindsided by Oates' plan to sell his part of Whole Oates Enterprises. I'm deeply troubled by the deterioration of my relationship and trust in John Oates, he said. Hall also said that the ordeal has unfolded while he's been in tour throughout the U.S., West Coast, and Asia. Hall said he believes Oates timed the sale to create the most harm to me. Hall accused Oates of becoming adversarial and aggressive instead of professional and courteous toward him in the last several years. As part of a proposed global divorce, Hall said he was entertaining the idea to dissolve their touring entity and a separate partnership related to their musical compositions and publishing, while Hall raised the idea of dissolving Whole Oates Enterprises. So this will be dragging on through the court system for some time. We might never hear the resolution simply because of the NDA and the arbitration and the court case. The court case, of course, is public to a large extent. Now, there can be sealed orders and so on entered in court cases, but I suspect what's going to happen here is the judge is going to call the parties in and go, do you guys have a pending arbitration right now? Does the pending arbitration cover what you're talking about in my courtroom? And if they say, yes, it does, the judge is going to say, okay, when will the arbitration be finished? Do you have a time frame? And if not, can we bring the arbitrator in and ask the arbitrator, when do you think this will be done? Here's what you're going to do. You're going to have your arbitration. And if the arbitration resolves everything, contact me with a dismissal. We'll dismiss it. If it doesn't settle everything, then you come back in here and we'll sit down and find out why your arbitration didn't settle everything. And then if we have to, we'll litigate that as well. So again, we only know about this because of the litigation filed in court, but they already have an arbitration going. So it's always interesting to watch these things play out. I'm fascinated by the music industry. I worked in radio for years. I'm not a musician, but I'm very familiar with a lot of this stuff. And of course, Hall & Oates is one of the biggest duos of all time. But again, these are arguments for a rainy day. And although it's raining out right now, I don't feel like arguing. So Neil and everybody else, thanks for sending it from the Chicago Sun-Times, the Associated Press. Jonathan Matisse wrote that Daryl Hall accuses John Oates of the ultimate partnership betrayal and plan to sell stake in their business. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Children are smarter than any of us. Know how I know this? I don't know one child with a full-time job in children.